My name is Eleanor. I'm 88 years old. It began the other night with the hinge on the kitchen drawer. I was looking for a pair of scissors, and my hand brushed a stack of envelopes, and for a second the sound of the drawer closing felt wrong, like I'd interrupted something. The envelopes are old. Some are yellowed at the edges. A few still have stamps that never got canceled. One has a string of faded lipstick across the corner. I'd forgotten how many there were. I don't know why I never threw them away. I told myself there was a reason. I told myself I would open them when I had time, when I had courage, when it mattered. I can hear how that sounds now, even as I say it. Courage, time. The drawer sits at my left, where my knee bumps it when I stand up. I've lived with that small bump for years, like a thing I didn't bother to fix. There are envelopes from my 20s. There are envelopes from last century. They have different hands on them, different expectations. They all carry the same weight, possibilities that sat folded and unread, like tiny nests of what-ifs. I grew up in a house with thin walls and a radio that never quite went silent. My father worked nights. My mother ironed shirts until her fingers shone, and I learned how to hide the tremble in my voice when I wanted something that seemed too loud for the room. I got married when I was 21. His name was Harold. We met at the library where I worked, and I remember the smell of the card catalog and how his laugh sounded behind the stacks. He had a job at the plant and a patience for quiet Sundays. We made a life that fit into the shape of a small kitchen table and a single coat rack. There are envelopes from the years I was young, with invitations printed in looping type, letters that should have made me decide between staying and leaving. One of them was from a school of art in Boston. I was accepted. I remember the paper like it was an animal that would never stop breathing. The city's address printed at the top, a line about scholarship possibilities. I folded that acceptance into a smaller square and slipped it into my pocket while Harold held my hands and told me how proud he was. I told myself I would go some other time. We had our first child the following spring. I put the envelope in the drawer and closed the kitchen on it. Another envelope is creased with the handwriting of a woman I loved when I was 29. We met at a dance. Her name was Ruth. She had a laugh that made me forget the sound of the factory whistle. We walked the riverbank at midnight and whispered about books and the terrible honesty of music. I wrote to her when I was married. She wrote back. Her letter smells faintly of cigarette smoke and lemon oil. It's the only one with writing that stops and starts mid-line, like someone listening for a sound. I didn't answer. I burned the one she saw me write and put the unopened return among the others. I tell myself I did it to protect myself. I tell myself I did it to protect others. Truth is, I was afraid of what being honest might do. There is a stack of envelopes tied with a ribbon, the ribbon brittle and dusted with flour from the attic. Those are letters I wrote. I wrote to my mother when she moved away, to friends who drifted, to a husband I loved in the way people hold small, hot things. I wrote apologies I never sent. I wrote thank yous and confessions and then slid them into envelopes and slipped them under the drawer lip so they wouldn't fall out when I opened it. I can see my younger hand folding paper. I can see the blot of ink where I paused and wondered whether to cross out a word. One envelope holds a letter from my son, the one who left when he was 18. His handwriting became stranger as the years went on, angular and quick, the letters like someone fleeing a room. I read that one a dozen times the week he moved out. After that, he stopped writing. There were postcards for a while, stamps from Mexico and Morocco, a note from a Paris train station written on a napkin, then nothing. I folded his last postcard and tucked it in the drawer with the rest. I told myself that he was finding himself, that my presence would only hold him down. I told myself he would come back. He didn't. I do not blame him. The truth is, I waited for the knock that never came, and I kept the letter in the drawer because it felt like proof I had tried. I have envelopes that were never delivered. I sometimes think of the postman and how his hands moved against the leather satchel, the ritual of faces and names. One envelope has no address at all, only my handwriting that says, "For later." Later came and went. The envelope sat among stronger, louder papers and was quiet. Inside is a note I wrote to myself on a bad day. It says simply, "Don't forget what you wanted." I must have been trying to remember something true, something I had misplaced. The note now is fragile. It thinks the act of remembering can be summoned by a line on paper. People ask me sometimes about choices, as if they were doors that clicked open. Decisions feel less like doors and more like furniture you push around a room until you no longer fit through the way you used to. The drawer is my furniture. The letters are the different arrangements. You can place them differently and make a new path, but the house is still the same house. When Harold got sick, I was 39. The house grew smaller in the way illness does. Corners moved closer. Voices became maps to pain. I learned how to hold a hand and count respirations. In the quiet hours, I would open the drawer and slide an envelope out to touch its weight. Sometimes I would read the lines in a different voice, the voice I thought I might have used if the world had handed me other tools. I learned to be careful with sound. I said less out loud and more on paper. It felt like folding yourself into a shawl, comforting, necessary, and constricting. After Harold died, I kept the drawer. I thought the envelopes might become evidence of who I had been. I wanted to prove that there had been other roads. I would bring one out sometimes and hold it between my fingers, feeling the ridge of the stamp. Once, drunk on grief and a middle-of-the-night radio program, I slit one open at the sink and read the words aloud so the house would have company with my shame. The things inside were small, a postcard with a sunset, an invitation to a dance I didn't attend, a coupon for a camera when I'd wanted to be a photographer. I read them and then put them back, the way a person sometimes knocks on a closed door just to be certain there is still a house behind it. The drawer kept growing with years. I tucked there invitations I had been too tired to accept, complaints I wanted to answer but feared making ripples, letters from fathers I never forgave, and lovers I never named. As children have children, they leave you messages on your phone, and you answer on the sly, like a thief in the night. The envelopes remained analog and stubborn. They didn't ding or buzz. They waited. One afternoon this winter, the house was too quiet for me. The radiator clanked and the kettle sang, and the light outside was a flat, small thing. I opened the drawer to fetch a recipe index card, and the envelopes crowded out the card like they'd grown. My fingers brushed one and caught the edge of a photograph tucked inside. It was a picture of me when I was 35, sitting at a bus stop with a paint-spattered sweater and a cigarette that I pretended not to like. I look younger in that photo, but my eyes are older than the rest of my face. There is a look there like someone only partly surprised by herself. I let the photograph sit on the table and read through the envelopes in order. I read the acceptance letters and the rejections, the sideways notes that said call me, and the official letters with letterhead that tasted like some future I had been invited to. I read a letter from a woman I once loved and never claimed. I read a letter from a university that said, "We regret to inform you," and a note from a friend who poured out sorrow over a husband who left. Each one was a scene I had not stepped into. Each one was a life in miniature. The realization didn't come all at once. It sat like a patient animal, blinking. I thought I had been making choices. I had bought a house, given birth, taken a job, learned how to cook a meal under pressure. I had been living, but the truth I arrived at slowly was that much of my life had been lived around things I didn't name. I lived in the space between invitations and responses. I lived with a steady habit of postponing myself. I remember once telling a neighbor that I liked the life I had, that there was comfort in the predictability of it. I meant the words then, but now, with the drawer open and the light dropping thinly across the table, I can see how comfort had been a way of not doing the harder thing. Comfort was the covering I used to avoid the irritation of change. I worried about causing trouble. I worried about being selfish. I worried about losing people's eyes when I looked at them. All the while, the years stacked in the drawer like unread mail. What was lost is not dramatic. There were no grand betrayals or great tragedies attached to the drawer. There was simply a life that, in places, bent to the shape of other people's needs. I did things that I believed were noble. I stayed, I waited, I made meals, I mended seams, I held a job to pay a mortgage, and I raised a child with steady hands. Those are true. I do not regret the tenderness I gave. But there were rooms in that tenderness where I did not enter. There were voices I did not allow to speak. My son came back once when he was 32. He stood at the threshold with a child at his hip, and I felt that ancient knot in my chest. We spoke of weather and of the place he'd been living. He brought a girl with him that my memory flattened into a face. We ate cold pizza, and he went to sleep on the couch. I thought then that the door between us had been reopened. I believed in my optimism in the way people believe in coins that have been found in couch cushions. He left again, and then months passed like paper folded and forgotten. One evening I put a letter in the drawer that said, "I forgive you," written in the cramped ink of a hand that wanted to be brave. I never sent it. There is a cost to waiting. It is not always the big loss that makes a life heavy. Sometimes it is the accumulation of small absences that gather like dust. The child you did not speak to during a painful year grows into a person who remembers you as someone who stood quiet. The paintings you never painted collect a different kind of silence. The conversation you never had forms a shape you cannot fit into later. These are not punishments. They are the architecture of a life you construct with the materials you are given and the ones you discard. I have tried to name the feeling that lives in my chest when I lift an envelope and hold it to the light. It is a weight made of small, unspoken things, a song I didn't learn, a language I started and then stopped, the afternoon I decided to teach, and the night I pretended to be brave. Once, the idea of myself as someone who would say yes to herself felt nearly indecent. There was always someone whose needs seemed clearer, more urgent. One of the envelopes is a note from a neighbor who wrote after Harold's funeral, telling me to come to the garden club, to live a little. I remember ironing the letter flat and putting it back. I do not tell you this to rattle on about regrets. I tell you this because the drawer is honest in its modesty. It does not shout. It does not demand. It merely holds the evidence of the quiet ways I declined certain lives. Lately, I have been trying to live with less of the pause between wanting and doing. At my age, that sounds like someone trying to fold a map with fingers gone clumsy. I have taken one envelope and opened it, quietly, not because I want to resurrect any lost thing, not because I think I can change what was. I read what I wrote to myself decades ago and was surprised by the tenderness of my younger hand. It was a small list of things: learn to use a camera, go to the lake at dawn, call Ruth. It felt foolish for not having tried harder. I think the truth the drawer taught me, slowly, is that life does not wait for permission. It is less an exhortation and more a fact. You can dwell long on whether the choices you make are good, and I did. You can wait for the time to be perfect. Perfection never comes. There will be mornings of fear and afternoons of courage, and you will balance them as best you can. Sometimes the waiting is exactly what you needed. Sometimes it is the thing that keeps you from the very small acts that would have made your days different. I don't know what good it does to lay open the past in this way. Maybe none. Maybe more than I can say. I do know that the drawer is not a monument of failure. It is an archive of an honest life, with all its omissions and kindnesses. I love the people who stayed in my life. I love who I became. The drawer is a quiet record of the roads I considered and then did not take. It has taught me that decisions are not only about the things you choose to do, they are also about the things you choose to delay. There are mornings now when I make tea and sit by the window and look at the envelopes. I do not open them all. Some days I simply shuffle them like someone rearranging playing cards. Other days I read a line and then I put it back. I do not think this is a neat salvation. I do not think there is a tidy ending waiting for me at the bottom of that drawer. I find, though, that the act of noticing is its own shape of living, noticing that I had wanted different things, noticing that I had loved in ways both grand and small, noticing that the murmur of my life contained rooms I had not entered. If anything has changed, it is that I have stopped pretending that time is endless. The house is the same, the kettle sings the same tune, but there is a new candor in my voice. I speak more freely now, not because I want to teach, but because the cost of silence has become sharper. I call old friends, I write postcards, and once in a while I slip an envelope in the mail. I do not apologize for the years I waited. I simply acknowledge that they were mine and that I carried them here. When I think of the drawer, I think of the smallness of most decisions and how they add up. I think of how we measure a life by the things we keep and the things we let go. I think of the daughter I might have been to myself, patient and fierce both. Mostly I think of the quietness that follows the unmade choice, the soft, persistent hum that fills a room when someone is not there who might have been. I do not want to leave you with a sermon. I am not in the habit of handing out lessons. This is not advice. I am at this moment a woman with a drawer of envelopes and a head full of names. I am tired and I am grateful, and there are things I wish I had done differently and things I am glad I did. The record is complicated, and it is mine. If you are hearing this and you have a drawer of your own, literal or not, know that it will look different up close than it does from across the room. The edges will be softer. The envelopes will smell like you and your past. They will be less like judgment and more like possibility in storage. You will carry them as long as you do, and perhaps you will open a few. Perhaps you won't. The only thing that matters in the end is what you are willing to hold when the day is quiet. Thank you for sitting with me for a while. If this reached you in any particular way, if it reminded you of a letter you never sent or a place you put off, I'd be glad to hear it. Leave a comment if you're feeling a small truth. If you've lived something similar, I'd like to listen. There are more stories here, slow and steady. If you'd like to hear them, you can stay. If not, I understand.